Hello, I am Charlie Reavis, President of Dysphonia International. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today, which is titled, Can Laryngeal Vibration Reduce the Voice Symptoms of Spasmodic Dysphonia? The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel and our website, dysphonia.org. We encourage all of your questions, and you can submit your questions by typing them into the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. And let me reiterate, please put your questions in the Q&A box. That makes it so much easier for us to follow and be able to monitor your questions. We ask that you not submit very personal questions, because this is not a forum or a format that's appropriate for those questions. I want to assure you that we will answer as many questions as time permits, and also that the questions we do not have time to answer today, we will get answers to and make those part of the webinar, which will be on our website. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jürgen Konczak, who will lead our distinguished panel. We're pleased to have Dr. Klein as clinician. We have researchers. We have people who have participated in these trials. So it's very interesting and informative panel that I'm sure we're going to have. And they're going to be discussing any of the recent findings from laryngeal vibration trials. Dr. Konczak earned his PhD in kinesiology from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He is director of the Human Sensorimotor Control Laboratory and the Center for Clinical Movement Science at the University of Minnesota. He is a professor in the School of Kinesiology at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Konczak's group has conducted research on somatosensory function in people with spasmodic dysphonia for a number of years now. He is the principal investigator of several trials that investigated whether vibro-tactile stimulation of the larynx can help to alleviate the voice symptoms of spasmodic dysphonia. His research has been funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health, U.S. National Science Foundation, the German Science Foundation, the European Commission, and Dysphonia International. So we're pleased to have Dr. Konczak and the panel with us today. So, Jürgen.
Yeah, Charlie, thank you so much for the nice introduction. So I'll have a presentation roughly about 20 minutes. Then we'd like to hear from people who have been participants in these clinical studies, and they'll provide their perspective of it. And then, as you can see here, we have Dr. Adam Klein from Emory University, otolaryngologist. So he will then also react to it. So he is someone who is a spasmodic dysphonia, laryngeal dystonia specialist. And then we also have here in the panel right now, Divya Bhaskaran. She was a coordinator of one of the clinical trials, has been involved in several of these studies. Arash Mahnan is here, was a graduate student in mine, is now a PhD, but has been involved and instrumental in several of these studies. And I think later on we'll see also Peter Watson. He is a collaborator of mine in the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences. So that just sets the stage. What I'll do now is I will try to share my screen with you. As I said, I'm going to talk about laryngeal vibration, and what it can do for people with laryngeal dystonia / spasmodic dysphonia. And let me start out by kind of talking about what do we know about what is different. Do you see these? I see all my. Can I just remove this? Hide the video panel. I'm just trying to figure out. Show the video. Hide floating controls. Okay, there we are. Let me start out and talk about what we kind of see here and get a handle on what is different in brain processing of people with SD. And I'll make this very, very simple, as I know that there are many people here in the audience who are not scientists. So we published a paper in 2019, talks about that atypical somatosensory motor cortical response when people with spasmodic dysphonia just vocalize, just say, ah. And I'll show you here a simple graph. So this is time, this is frequency of motor cortical neurons firing. And what typically is happening, if the voice becomes active, the neurons in the brain fire at a certain frequency, and then they are in synchrony, and then they fire, and then there is what people call an event-related depression. So that's, every one of us shows this when we trying to do something voluntary, whether this is speaking, whether this is shaking your head, whether this is writing, any of this, any voluntary motor activity. So now, when it comes to voice and motor cortical activity over the laryngeal motor cortex, what do we see with people with SD? We see that this synchronicity of their networks is higher than in people who don't have SD. They show event-related depression, but the event-related depression is not up to the level of what we see in people with people who do not have SD. So basically, and I put this here in, so there is this excessive synchronization of motor and somatosensory cortical networks. And somatosensory cortex, I'll tell you in a minute what this is. That characterizes spasmodic dysphonia when it comes to cortical processing. So then we understand there is a motor system that helps us to voice, the laryngeal muscles. And we have a somatosensory system, which is really a system that gets where all the bodily information, all the bodily senses are getting processed in the brain, and it informs the motor system. And here in SD, we have a voice impairment. And the notion is, can we do some form of somatosensory stimulation? And that somatosensory stimulation then hopefully leads to restored or improved motor function. So how do you do somatosensory stimulation? In essence, you have a set of mechanoreceptors in the skin or in the muscles of the larynx, and you try to stimulate this. How can one do this? So what we do is we take little vibratory motors. You see they are wired, there's some current coming in, and they vibrate. We'll stick them to the larynx, and I'll get into more detail about this. And so you will feel, or the person who wears this will feel some form of vibration. And why should this even work? So you get basically feedback, and you feel this feedback that gets into the brainstem. It reaches somatosensory cortex. Somatosensory cortex modulates activity of motor cortex. Motor cortex speaks back to brainstem, to the neurons or the nuclei that control speech. And so we basically modulate, we interfere in the speech motor somatosensory loop. So that's a bit of neurophysiology behind it. And I just talked about this. Typically, we've stimulated around 100 hertz, which is about 60 to 7 hertz when it reaches spindles. So I don't want to get in too many details here. Then let's see what is the effect of this when you do this as a person with SD. What happens in cortical activity? And so we did this. We looked at people with SD. We had one ABSD, we had 12 ADSD, so adductor versus abductor. And they basically got 2 bouts of 17 minutes. So when they do this, so what do we see? We see low frequency stimulation, so low frequency activity over cortex. So this is somatosensory cortex, this is primary motor cortex, this is frontal motor cortex. And I don't want to bore you with too many details. This is event-related spectral power. And what you want to see this going down. So this is stimulators are off, stimulator vibrators are on, and you want to see a drop. And what you see is a drop basically over all parts here you see of laryngeal somatosensory cortex. So you see a quick, fast response to it. And that is something that we can report. For those who are interested in EEG, I can speak about this a lot more later on, but let's keep it at this. Bottom line is, you turn these vibrators on and you see a very quick, immediate response to vibration. And we can measure this in the brain. So this is what I put down here. So then let's think about it. What does it do to voicing? What does it do to speech? And what we've did is did this the first study. We had a pretest. Then we vibrated, or people experienced this for 17 minutes. Then we tested. Then they get another 17 minutes. Then we tested again. And then we waited 20 minutes and we looked at what happened after 20 minutes. So then let me introduce this measure, CPPS. It sounds very complicated, smooth septal peak prominence. So this is an acoustic measure of speech quality. Basically, what you want to see a number that goes up. You want to see something that goes ideally, definitely above 2, maybe even above 3. So this is when you hear as a person a clear change. And Dr. Watson can speak about this later in more detail. So what do we see? Now you see all these individual patients, and some of them you can see here, they'll respond very quickly. Here, like SD5, so you see changes in over 3 dB, 2 dB, 1 dB. So some people clearly responded. And then you see some people not so much. Then you look at another measure, and this is the number of voice breaks. So people with, as you know, people with adductor spasmodic dysphonia have voice breaks. Will these voice breaks go down? And you see here in clearly the group that responds, voice breaks drop very quickly and drastically. And they kind of stay on even after 20 minutes of vibration. The ones that did not respond didn't have any voice breaks. Then let me see. So we had roughly 69% of patients responded. So it worked. And I'll give you
Tom wants to be in the army.
Example.
We eat eels every day.
So this is before.
He was angry about it all year.
So this is a person who somewhat responded.
Tom wants to be in the army.
That's afterwards.
We eat eels every day. He was hungry about it all year.
Okay, so you hopefully got some indication of what works. Then we got funding through NRDCD, and we literally conducted a longer term trial. So we did 11-week in-home training intervention. people came to us here in Minnesota, got introduced, and we basically did an in-lab training and assessment. Then they went home, did this for 4 weeks at home, and then they came back in week 6. We tested them again. Then they went home again for 4 weeks, and then they came back. So what do we see? Then they basically all got the vibrators. They got a setup which is basically a power source here. They all attached it regularly to their voice box. They did this 1 or 3 times per week for about 20 minutes each. So that's, if you get a sense for how much vibration people actually received. Then let's look at what happened over time. So, and I'll show you here a graph. This is relative change in CPPS, so in the clarity, strength of the voice. And this is, then we ask people, is your effort lower or higher? What happens? So we look at change in voice effort. So you want to see something negative here, and you want to see something positive here. So if someone is in this quadrant, not very good, decreased voice quality, increased effort. You would like to be somewhere in this quadrant, improved voice quality, reduced voice effort. So that's what, ideally, if you respond to VTS, that's where you should be. And this is what we see in week 1, after they basically went in that session during the lab, and we recorded how they responded. You see people with Botox and no Botox, and basically you see both people with Botox or no Botox may respond. And you had a sizable group in this quadrant, but you also had some people who improved effort, but not voice quality. And you had some people who really didn't improve at all. And then what happened in week 6? So in week 6, when you look, you see more people in this ideal quadrant, the way Divya always talks about this. So you get more people in this. So they kind of move into this quadrant and clearly show a benefit. And then in week 11, they also still show benefits, but it may get a little less. So that's kind of the longitudinal effect, very, very briefly of what we see. Then what we did, and Arash was very instrumental in this, we designed a wearable device where we basically have a collar with these 2 vibrators embedded, and people can actually wear it. So you're not tethered to a bunch of cables and a power source. And the power source is literally a small battery here. And ideally, you could control this whole thing with an app on your smartphone or smart device. And that's kind of how it looked like. So this is a prototype. I don't want to bore you with the electronics. This is kind of how it looks like right now. Not very chic, but functional. So this was a prototype. Then we did a study with people with abductor SD. And they basically got 2 bouts of 17 minutes VTS. And for 7 minutes each, we also recorded EEG. And then we looked at what happens after 20 minutes, and then what happens after 60 minutes. Very brief, what do we see? Let me walk you through. Perceived change after 24 minutes of vibration. 4 people basically said, very unnoticeable, neutral, didn't get much. And we had 11 people in this study. And you had a whole bunch of other people, 7 here, saying, wow, noticeable to very noticeable change. So that's just the subjective impression of the person receiving vibration through the color. So basically 36% said it doesn't really work for me. 64% said, yes, something happened to me. If you look at measures, and these were people with abductor SD, and you know their sentence durations, they take longer to finish a sentence. So ideally, what you would like to see, if you have a set of test sentences and you look at them, their length, and you see how much it shortens, you would see a decrease in, so basically people speak faster, complete these test sentences faster. And really what you have here for this variable, about 5 people clearly showed this, but you also had some people who did not show meaningful shortened and sentence duration. Now, let me as I'm in the closing stages here, give you an example of one person who really responded. This is a person with abductor SD before and after VTS.
Patty helped Caddy carve the turkey. Harry is happy because he has a new horse.
Okay. Now, after VTS.
Patty helped Caddy carve the turkey. Harry is happy because he has a new horse.
I would think that everyone heard the difference. So you can see some people who respond very quickly and very positively. So let's finish up here. Take-home messages. So what we're saying is it can induce measurable change in voice quality. It can reduce voice effort in people. Roughly about 2/3 of our participants showed some form of benefit, either reduced voice effort or measurable change in voice quality, or both. Good news, both abductor and people with adductor SD may respond. So it's not just the adductors. Effect really 1 to 20 minutes. We basically see it kind of works for about 20 to 60 minutes in our clinical trials. But we do have anecdotal reports from people who said it lasted much longer. And some of you said it lasted for days. People with and without Botox may benefit. So that's another good news. And so far, really, we have tested now on about 100 people with spasmodic dysphonia, and we had no adverse effects were reported. So I want to close before I give the voice to other people with a quote from a participant who just sent this email very recently to us. And she said, I was a participant in the study. I had not given any thought to what the effects would be and was completely shocked to find my voice flowing effortlessly as if I had never had ABSD. For about an hour, I was able to make sounds I would usually struggle with, and I was able to achieve volume I only dream of now. I realized that speech before SD felt very different than it is now, even though I'm coping very well. So that's really what I have as my presentation. And let me see. Where am I? Okay, there we are. So we are back, and I think I would now give the voice to people who have experienced this, like there's Dennis Kaszeta and there's Ree Champagne, and they may just really provide their subjective experiences. Dennis, maybe you want to start?
Sure, be happy to. Yeah, my experiences were very positive. First, I want to say the University of Minnesota, it was a good experience. You really have a good staff. Arash was unbelievable, and so was Naveen, and of course yourself. My experiences, when I was first doing it, there was a lot, I was on the edge of needing a Botox injection. So consequently, there was more voice strain. A lot of times when I'm getting very close to a need for injection, there's a kind of burning of the voice or extra effort to verbalize. Now, when I did the VTS, it was really an experience where I found a lot of that effort was reduced. When I was doing the at-home training, I experienced probably about 20 minutes of stimulation. And afterwards, I would vary sometimes between 40 and 50 minutes of what I would call a much improved voice. So I see this as being something that could be very beneficial to people who have SD. It could either be in the absence of using Botox or perhaps using it in tandem with Botox. So my experience was very positive. Frankly, I would like to be able to either purchase or somehow access the collar. So that gives you kind of a brief sense of what it was like.
Thank you, Dennis. Ree, would you like to add some of your experience? You need to turn on your mic, Ree.
Okay, got it. Okay, so I have had adductor SD for like 50 years. I had Botox for over 20 years, and the Botox was very unpredictable. Sometimes it worked, but most times it didn't. So last summer, when I found out we were going to be in Minnesota, I contacted the lab at the university, and they were very kind and let me come in and use the VTS. I believe it was for only 10 minutes, the treatment, but afterwards, I cannot even tell you how amazing it was. I could talk much easier right away. After my husband and I left the lab and went back to our hotel room, I had a friend who had a birthday that day. So I decided to call, and I could actually sing happy birthday. I have not been able to sing since I was in my 20s, and I'm 74 now. So it's been a long time. I would definitely love to have the collar or further treatments. I think it was a huge help, and it lasted almost 3 days. So it was a very short treatment for 3 days of being able to talk with hardly any effort. So it was amazing, and I really appreciated being able to try it out.
Thank you, Ree, for your comments, and thank you, Dennis. I think very important to hear from people who actually experience this. I think I don't know whether Divya or Arash or Peter have anything before we turn over to Adam. Any comments? Divya, you saw a lot of these participants over the years. Arash saw also, he was instrumental in the study and literally building the color and then collecting data with people with AB, SD. So any comments on your side?
I I just want to say it was a really unique experience working on this project for about 3 years, I think. I got to interact with a lot of Dysphonia International members, and I think there's some of them names I recognize in the attendee list as well. One thing I would definitely say was that Dysphonia International, previously NSDA, have been very instrumental in providing us with participants and connecting us to people who were interested in the study. So I do want to say that we did see a huge variety of responses. We saw people who responded, like Ree and Dennis Kaszeta, but there were people who didn't respond, or there were people who responded in a mild manner. So there were wide ranges of responses that we saw. And again, we tested for a span of 11 weeks. So that was also a good range to test to see over large amount of time how it changed people's voices or how it affected their effort. And right now we're working on the report to publish the results of that study right now. I'm here to answer any questions later on if there's any Q&A. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Arash and Peter, anything you'd like to add? Arash, we don't hear you.
Oh.
I think, go ahead, Arash.
Oh, okay. Is it working now?
Now it's working.
Okay, so good. Just wanted to say hi to everyone and just thank for the opportunity that I was able to work and do some work and try to help the community. And I really appreciate the working with patients, working with everyone here. It was a very, very great experience on my end, and I'm happy that we had some positive outcome out of the research.
And Peter, so Peter has been very instrumental in helping us to set up the study, has been very instrumental in helping us to analyze all these voice data. And you have a lot of experience with people with SD. So Peter, what's your take on?
Excuse me, my dog. I didn't see the patients. I heard all of them. And I think that if anyone in the speech research would study these, they shouldn't rely only on CPPS. They should rely upon counting voice breaks. And also, if they're looking at abductor spasmodic dysphonia, they should also measure the sentence duration. It's not always, one doesn't always lead the other, and so there's some differences between patients and how they respond.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's kind of the variables that we have been looking at it exactly. Okay, I see we are about 22. I think we are good in time, I think. Adam, I would like you, as someone who literally treats people with spasmodic dysphonia, with a lot of clinical experience, who's also a prominent clinical researcher, your reaction, your comments to it.
Thanks, Jürgen, and hello, everyone. Well, first off, it's very encouraging to hear what you've presented, and of course to hear from Dennis and Ree with their personal experiences. We know from other areas in medicine that stimulating the somatosensory system can be quite helpful. It's done sometimes with the sensory and mechanoreceptors with chronic cough. It's done in seizures. It's done in chronic pain sometimes. There's even some data out there to talk about restoration of touch and proprioception by kind of these sensory tricks, right? Which is effectively what you're talking about. And so it makes sense that this would also have a positive effect, at least on a percentage of people. Obviously, nothing works with everyone, but it's certainly encouraging and something that I could foresee being a wonderful supplement to management of patients For those that get good, long-lasting effect from it, maybe replacing the need for Botox injections, or lightening the dosage, or the frequency of injections. For those that get a more temporary improvement, it could be something that is done right before someone has an important event or meeting or somewhere where they're somewhat anxious about getting up in front of a group of people or having a particular interaction. So I think it could be a very nice supplement in those situations. And obviously with no risk, effectively no risk, as far as we know, then you're not burning any bridges, and you're not preventing other treatments such as Botox from working. So I think it's a really nice option. I've been noticing a couple of, I know we're going to get to other questions, but I've been reading the questions that are popping up, and they kind of reflect some of my thoughts as well, about, for those that maybe don't have access to a voice center, are there other similar types of devices out there that, I guess the question is, how specific does it need to be from a frequency perspective? Or do people get, change in benefit if they use it for longer periods of time or more frequently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, these are clearly some of the important questions. I can talk very briefly. I did not show any data on frequency in this study. Literally, we looked at low frequency modulation, about 40 hertz. And 40 hertz, we know, will only stimulate tactile mechanoreceptors in the skin, will not penetrate really the thyroid cartilage. And we see even just stimulating the skin may work for some people. So we see 40 hertz stimulation can be effective. So you don't have to have a vibrator that is strong enough to penetrate the thyroid cartilage. Now we do see clearly, and this is where Divya and I are just working on, there may be a somewhat more benefit to 100 hertz, but whether this comes out statistically significant, we don't know yet. But that's one thing. The other question, of course, is dosage over a longer period of time. And Adam and everyone else, we don't have data on this yet. So will it, so we did this 3 times. 1 week, week 6, week 11. And basically we tested, and what we see? We see, people respond, right? And you respond in addition to your Botox, if you get it. The question is now, is there something, if you do this longer, will there be kind of like a buildup over time? Or will it just be, as you kind of said, is it just immediate, then it's gone? And then you do it 2 days later, it's immediate, and then it's gone. So that's clearly not studied yet. We don't know. And my hunch is that in some people, it seems to kind of build up, but we don't have enough clear evidence for it yet. We have to be honest about it. Okay. Looks like we are German models of punctuality. So it's Q2. I would be okay with.
We're doing well on time, Jürgen. No concern. Kind of following along what Adam was talking about and you were just talking about. I've seen a few questions here where people are asking, do you have any, based on the trials and the work that you guys have done, do you have some intuitive thoughts or perceptions of why the vibration works in some people and other people that just doesn't seem to be any effect at all?
Yeah, I think we can speculate for this. So so if you're looking at dystonia, focal form of dystonia, and spasmodic dystonia or laryngeal dystonia is one form. We know that there is such a thing as cervical dystonia, blepharospasm, writer's cramp. There are other forms, so it can affect other muscles. So if you just look at that body of research on all of these, like as Adam said, yes, they all have a somatosensory processing abnormalities. We see this. Now, how should it? God, I forgot your questions. What did you ask?
Well, it basically was just your intuition and perception from
why it works for some and it doesn't work for others. Yes.
Yeah,
Now let me get back. So if you start looking at this and you see there are, for instance, with cervical dystonia, there are clearly some people, a large group, who uses sensory tricks, touching, and it works. Another group doesn't have a sensory trick. So they are not susceptible to that somatosensory stimulation. Now, in terms of the pathophysiology behind it, and as you know, there are people with voice tremor and not tremor. There are also people like in cervical dystonia with tremor or no tremor. There seem to be some distinction between these groups. So we have done some research on people with cervical dystonia, where it kind of distinguishes people with tremor versus non-tremor. Do we have really clear evidence? Why? So there may be likelihood two different areas or two different networks being turned on. And so the pathomechanism in these same presentation, somewhat slightly different manifestations in terms of tremor versus non-tremor may differentiate these. We don't know, we haven't done this for SD systematically, but this is one of the things we are looking into as well. And so likelihood is one, it's a different pathomechanism. There are ones that do not respond. The other thing is, it may be that they'll take longer to respond. Maybe they'll really need it for several weeks before they get there. Do we know this? We don't, because really we didn't have the time and the funds to study this systematically.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jürgen. Is there any concern that VTS could negatively impact the thyroid? And I would ask Jürgen, maybe you and Adam could comment on that.
Adam, do you want to take this?
I'd be happy to. Can you repeat the question once more? I'm sorry, a patient was reaching.
That's fine, Adam. Is there any concern that VTS could negatively impact the thyroid?
Oh gosh, I don't see why. I don't see why that would be. It's nothing I've given thought to before nor read anything about in particular, but I don't see why vibratory stimulus would affect the thyroid.
Okay.
And I think it's also,
there could be,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Charlie, but it's based on the pictures, you know, it looks like it's more over the larynx than the thyroid anyway. The thyroid would be far enough from the maximum point of stimulation where, you know, I really don't think it'd be an issue. And again, I don't think there's any mechanism to explain why it would.
Okay, good. Thanks, Adam. Do you think there would be an application for handheld devices going forward that would be as effective as the device that you guys developed?
So, I mean, we did a lot of preliminary work and tested out a whole bunch of different vibrators. Because if you're thinking about a vibrator, it's a frequency and it's the amplitude, how far it penetrates. And so we spent quite some time to figure out what is a good vibrator that people tolerate nicely, where we don't get adverse effects. We looked at vibrators that have a higher penetration, and people will actually get gag reflexes. They don't like it. So clearly, it's not just any vibrator will work. I think you need to be a bit careful about this. Also, you need to be careful because here the carotid arteries are here. So you just don't want to just do it just anywhere, right? I think you need to be careful about it. So that's what I can say. Literally, the vibrators that we have used now, there are also some different ones and the newer models out there. They seem to work. The good thing about these, they're cheap. They're not expensive. So that's in terms of, this isn't like a high-tech piece of equipment.
I've seen several questions where people are asking, does this have to be in specific voice centers, and how could they try it and so forth? I think it would be good, Jürgen, to again just emphasize the fact that all your work up to this point has been a trial, and kind of frame that so everybody has it all in perspective.
Ideally, we build these things, Dennis, and give them out to everyone who needs them or wants them. That would be the ideal scenario. I can say that we are following up. We are trying to do another clinical trial, this time multi-center clinical trial where Emory University as well as Columbia University in New York are involved, plus us. We also, I mean, honestly, we get contacted by people like Ree, for instance, saying, is there a way I can get this? So what we have done lately, we literally try to ship some units just to people to try them out. Literally, just try it out. And Adam, like to reiterate your point, we had a gentleman got it, and he figured that before meetings, so he's professional, he has meetings, and he said, before meetings, I've done it, and it seemed to kind of like help me to go through the meeting. We are, I think, at a stage now where we literally, I think it's time to get more broad users out there, get literally user experience from many more than just a small group. That's what I'd like to do. That's why we need to get the money for it. And the color, so for all of you, this is a prototype right now. We don't have a manufacturer for it. We don't have a company. So is this doable? Yes, it's doable. We also looked into this whole notion about FDA approval. So if we build a device, you have to go through FDA approval. That's part of what you need to do these clinical trials. So long answer to a very important short questions. We will try to make it as available to as many as we can. I think all of those who are here in this call, I was also thinking about either we'll open up a kind of a questionnaire on our lab website, or we communicate this to Dysphonia International, who would be interested in trying it out. And so we kind of like get a feel for how many people are actually out there. And then we'll see what we can do and what we can finance.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good, Jürgen. Along those lines, I think I've seen several questions. Are you still accepting participants in any aspect of your trial?
So we finished this longitudinal trial, is finished. So right now we don't have an open clinical trial. So this is like, we are literally have applied for further NIH funding. That one, you never know when it comes or if it comes. That's the reality of scientific life.
Here's an interesting question, Jürgen, and well, the whole panel. Do you think that there's some stimulation of the vagus nerve as a result of this VTS, and that in fact is contributing to the positive benefit?
Interesting question, because of course vagus nerve stimulation is out there as an invasive method,
Right.
and people do vagus nerve stimulations for a range of conditions and try this out. I don't, and Adam, you can, I don't see how it directly stimulates vagus nerve. I don't see how this could be happening, whether it's part of that network, whether it modulates, because of course it will reach brainstem nuclei, and brainstem nuclei also project, or vagus nerve is there too. So indirectly, but I don't see it like directly. And Adam, you can add to this.
I would agree. I don't think, I doubt it's directly stimulating it. Again, the somatosensory stimulation tends to have an effect on the somatosensory system. It'd be easy enough question to answer though. You put it on someone and stick a scope in their nose, and then you can see if there's any vagal nerve stimulation. But I'd be surprised if there was.
Jürgen, you might mention how this all began in terms of the study you did, behavioral study you did at first regarding the perception of movement, not in the laryngeal area, but in people who had spasmodic dysphonia with regard to sensing or having attenuated sense in the arm.
Yeah, so this is a good 10 years ago when we started out, and Peter was also a principal investigator on this first grant, where we literally looked at somatosensory or proprioceptive deficits in people with spasmodic dysphonia or muscle tension dysphonia, and whether we can differentiate these two. Bottom line is, if you do the right of experiments and kind of, for instance, passively move the forearm, people don't see it, and you ask them about what they perceive, motion or change in position, you'll see there are some people with spasmodic dysphonia will definitely be abnormal in that respect. Now, it's clinically not relevant because they don't report a problem with their hands and arms, but what it shows is that there is some somatosensory cortical abnormality that may bleed out into other areas of somatosensory cortex, in this case, the arm area, arm and hand.
Dr. Klein, I think that this is not specifically to the device per se, but it's questions that I know you hear all the time, and certainly I hear, and we do in our organization. Is SD a form of Parkinson's or some other neurological condition?
It's not on the spectrum of Parkinson's, as far as I'm aware, unless there's been some reclassification. It's part of the focal dystonias. So those are, those are classified differently.
Okay. Interesting question too. What is the amplitude that's being used, and how is it that vibrating the skin would initiate vocal fold vibrations?
Vibrating of the skin will not do vibration of the vocal cords. It will not even penetrate it if you just do this at that low level. But what it will stimulate it will stimulate mechanoreceptors in the skin, like Ruffini endings. And those mechanoreceptors in the skin definitely send signals to somatosensory cortex. So that's what this will do. So you don't mechanically vibrate larynx or vibrate the vocal cords. You don't. And it's, Charlie, if you think about this again, people with sensory tricks, and there are also, and Adam, you can add to this, there seem to be also some people with spasmodic dysphonia, laryngeal dystonia, who have a sensory trick or know that something they'll touch benefits. And this is not, they don't massage their voice box. They'll have a spot that they touch.
Yep, absolutely. Good description, Jürgen. Couple of questions for coming from people who have multiple focal dystonias. So could the VTS potentially be used for some of those others? And you've touched a little bit on that, Jürgen, with cervical dystonia and so forth.
Yeah, I think, and as you spoke, and Adam talked about this too, if you really look at a range of neurological diseases that show motor or have some form of motor impairment, many of them have a somatosensory / proprioceptive component. And that's why people seem to benefit when you stimulate somatosensory system. It does something to the motor system, and that's what we see. So do we see this? We've literally done a clinical trial with over 60 people with cervical dystonia now. We just finished this. And there are groups in Europe and groups in Canada and us did this. And you do this with dystonia of the neck and very similar kind of things. Some people really benefit from it. We see people in terms of head writing. It will work for some of them. We saw that some of them pain definitely improves. So I would think certainly for some of these dystonias, writer's cramp, in theory, it should also work. Have people done this, for instance, as you spoke, to Parkinson's disease? Also shows somatosensory deficits. Have people done this? Yes, and we haven't done this systematically, but I would think likelihood, yes, it may provide some form of benefit.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap up the questions. I just have one more I'd like to ask you guys to comment on. Have you thought about incorporating speech therapy in conjunction with use of VTS?
We haven't, but I think those are some of the I think those are some of the important questions to follow up. What is, for instance, I mean, the interaction between Botox and VTS, the interaction between speech therapy and VTS? Can they help each other? Do we get like an added effect? Honestly, we don't know. We don't know. What we do know, for instance, just from this last clinical trial, people with Botox, they get an added benefit from it when they do it. So it's not like, so every time they do it, they get something plus. That's what we know, but we haven't studied this systematically. But yeah, very important question. I don't know, okay. Adam, if you want to add to this.
Well, I don't have any great insight into it, except that I'd be remiss if I didn't say speech pathology should be tried in any situation.
Yeah, we know that it certainly helps most of us who are getting Botox injections that speech therapy definitely can help in that regard. So.
And to that end, Charlie, you know, where speech pathology really helps in patients with laryngeal dystonia is with the compensatory muscle tension behavior. And that's where we really see the added benefit because people are compensating for the involuntary spasms. And so if you add speech pathology on top of it, it's very helpful. So I would imagine that speech therapy would offer some benefit. Hard to say exactly, you know, in what capacity, but maybe it would heighten or optimize the effects of VTS.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Adam. Okay, I think we'll wrap up with some final comments here from each of you, if you choose, and we'll just start off with Arash. Any thoughts, comments?
I think, yeah, just like during the discussion that everyone was having, I was trying to answer some of the question offline and provide some insight. I think there are multiple questions about the effectiveness, long-term effectiveness, that are very valid questions. And some of them are also our question. That's why we are going to, or Dr. Konczak is going to continue the research and to look at on multiple centers, to look at the longer effect of it. Just one thing that I saw in some of the comments that they were asking about the electromagnetic field, just for everyone to know that this is a very low current, low voltage, but we don't expect to see any of those like effect. Is mostly like basically you have a very minor vibration. The other question I saw that is about like using other vibrators, like a home vibrators that they can use for the stimulation. Just I'm cautioning everyone about the frequency, about the location. So there are other aspects that you need to be mindful of. So it's not that any type of vibration with any location would work. So there's like, we have done a lot of research to find the proper location, to find the best vibrator that could stimulate the muscle spindles and mechanoreceptors. So we have done some of those initial research, and we got to the vibrator that we're using right now. So just like, again, cautioning everyone about this, that if you try it with another type of vibration, and you might get or you might not get the result, but that's, I don't want to discourage or encourage you in that way.
Great. Thanks, Arash. Divya, what are your thoughts, final comments?
I think similar to what Arash just said, I've also been answering some of the questions in the Q&A. But yes, I don't have anything else to add. Everybody's already covered. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Peter.
Well, I think we would like to see NIH take a more active, excited role in interest in this, because it does take money to do these studies, and they have been somewhat helpful, but we're hoping that they will come through to a greater degree than they have at this point.
Great point, Peter. Absolutely. Ray, what are your thoughts?
Ree, me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm pretty excited about it. Like I said, I haven't been able to speak with a steady voice or sing for years and years, and with just a very short treatment, I was able to speak normally for several days, and I would wish that for everyone who has spasmodic dysphonia. It's a miracle.
Good points, Ray. Thank you. Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the treatment has great promise for the future. What I saw during my time, the low voltage really didn't bother me in any form. And again, you know, it lasted for 30, 40 minutes. And that was exciting. So to see that stand alone, or perhaps in the future with Botox, I see it as great promise. I do.
Good. Thanks, Dennis. Dr. Klein.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I think I would echo what Peter mentioned, that having some NIH interest would allow for the ability to take this to the next level, right? In order to get any device out of prototype phase and to commercialization, you obviously have to collect data on it for your regulatory process. And then ultimately you need enough money to scale it up and work towards incorporation. But the those initial steps are critical, which is why so many of these types of things kind of die on the vine, because you don't get the buy-in. And so with something that has promise, it's so important to keep the funding coming.
Great. Thank you, sir. Jürgen.
Yeah, so on that, following up, all of you here who listen, talk to your congressman, send an email saying, hey, there's a rare disease program at NIH. Talk to the people at NIDCD and let them know that that's what you hear, because clearly you are an advocate, and they will try to listen to you, possibly more than to me or Dr. Klein, in that respect. And what I've done this now for some years, and I have seen this, and I have seen these success stories like what Ree, for instance, or Dennis talked about. I want to make this real. That's what I want. I would like to push forward and get this out in some respect so that people with laryngeal dystonia literally have another form of therapeutic intervention that may just be adjuvant in addition to existing therapies. Maybe it's, if they don't have any other therapeutic options, it may help them, even if it, as Dennis said, even if it only helps me 45 minutes or something like this, hey, I'll take it. So that's what my hope would be, that we move forward and can get this pushed forward and make this available. And I will do anything I can do to push. So thanks all of you for listening, and exciting.
Yeah, very good. Jürgen, I want to thank each one of you, you and Dr. Klein, Peter, Divya, Arash, all the work that you guys have done on this project, and certainly for participating in the webinar tonight. But most importantly, all the support and help you guys give us in our organization and the voice community. And I want to thank Ree and Dennis for participating in the trial and joining the session this evening for their terrific feedback and input. So it's been a great session, and we just have to continue to push to try to get NIDCD looking at this as a potential treatment option. And all of us have, as you said, all of us have to help do that. So again, my appreciation to each one of you. Thanks so much. And especially all of the participants. Great questions. I know there were several other questions that we didn't get to on this session, but we will be asking the panelists to provide us input in response to those questions, and it'll be recorded, and it'll be part of the webinar on our website, again, which is dysphonia.org. So until next month, and our webinar in June will be on June 28th. So mark your calendars. Look forward to seeing all of you. And again, thanks to everyone. Appreciate it very, very much. Take care.